Somebody wants to speak first.
No, please go ahead. Everybody is on mute, so the only one that's open is you.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so first it was a pleasure to be with people, to be with back in Holland. Can you hear me now? You can't hear me? Somebody's saying they can't hear. Mayor Solomon is saying he can't hear. Can others hear me? I'm not on mute, so you can hear. Ruben can hear. Okay, now you can all hear. Fantastic. Okay, so our topic is, of course, themed around Lag BaOmer. The fact that we're approaching that point in the calendar, and of course that's going to Lag BaOmer. We know we celebrate it, but what's a celebration? Why do we celebrate? So there's two aspects, two dimensions. The first that we hear about is from the Gemara Menachos. The Gemara says that Rabbi Akiwa had 24,000 students, or 12,000 pairs of students more precisely, and they all died at one period between Pesach and Atzeres, in other words, between Pesach and Shavuot, which means this time of year. And the medieval commentators, the Meiri and so on, they say that they died. The strong tradition is they died for the first 32 days of the Omer. There's some discrepancy, some discussion about that, but it seems that the students stopped dying on the 32nd day of the Omer. And so Lag BaOmer becomes this celebration of the end of the death of Rabbi Akiwa's students. That's reason number one, also brought down in the source in the Shulchan Aruch. The other reason is as follows, is that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the great, actually student of Rabbi Akiwa, who has a whole description, the Zohar, in fact, the Zohar itself is his teachings, the whole description, the Zohar of how he died the day of his death. He gathered the students and he began to teach them incredibly deep things, and he just expired doing so. And the Arizal or Chaim Vitalis say that day was Lag BaOmer. So we've got two seemingly unrelated elements, the end of the death of Rabbi Akiwa's students, and the sort of revealing of the secrets of Torah that was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's last day. And there's a number of questions that come from all this, the most obvious being the one that's the title of this talk. It's very nice that Rabbi Akiwa's students stopped dying on this day. But well, first of all, let's ask this. When was the last time you remember celebrating the end of a destruction of Jewish people? Right? Jewish communities were massacred in the Rhineland massacres in the Crusader times. Do you know any day in the calendar where we celebrate the fact they stopped being massacred? Do we celebrate the fact there was the end of the killing of Jews in Spain? Do we celebrate the fact there was the end of the killing of Jews in the Holocaust or the Khmelnytsky massacres? Or what does it mean to celebrate the end of them dying? We don't do that. That's strange. But it's much worse over here, because how many students of Rabbi Akiwa were there? Well, 24,000 died, right? So how many were there before? And it seems from the Gemara and Nedarim, it seems there was 24,000. So it sounds like the reason they stopped dying is they'd all died. Well, if they'd all died, then how on earth can this be a time of celebration? I imagine in a town, the entire Jewish community is wiped out. You say, oh, let's celebrate today, forever after, because no more Jews are being killed. What do you mean? Every single Jew was killed. Every single student of Rabbi Akiwa died. So what are we doing? So that's the really difficult question. And one that we need to start our exploration of. By the way, the full text of the Gemara says like this. It does have a slightly positive note. It says that the world was desolate until Rabbi Akiwa came to the south. He came to these, there were some students he found in the south of the country, 5 of them. Rav Yehuda, Rav Shimon, found a few of the students, and he taught them, and that's it. So let's try to put this all together. Let's try to understand what's happening. Let's try to, in general, by the way, this period of time, the Omer is it was meant to originally be a very joyful time. The time between Pesach and Shavuot should be a celebration. We're commemorating the first 7 weeks of the new harvest. They parallel the first 7 weeks of Jewish history from when we came out of Egypt until we received the Torah. They bridge these two great festivals of Pesach and Shavuot and make them into one big festival, as the Ramban says. So this should be joyful. It's the death of Rabbi Akiwa's students that cast a deep shadow. By the way, in European Ashkenazic communities, you'll notice, so for example, you'll notice that right now, because we're mourning the death of Rabbi Akiwa's students, many people have different customs of mourning. not making weddings this time, even if there wasn't a coronavirus, not listening to live music, not shaving, not having haircuts, various different things. And Ashkenazic communities sometimes actually keep a second half of the Omer instead, partly because, likely, it's not explicit in the sources, but very likely because the Rhineland massacres actually happened around this time as well, in the second half of the Omer, just before Shavuos. Okay, history aside, but what's the celebration? This should be a disaster. What's the celebration? Lag BaOmer. Why do we turn those last 17 days round into joy? This is a time of, it should be only darkness. No, the students finish dying. So let's take it and let's understand this step by step a little bit. Who's Rabbi Akiwa? So Rabbi Akiwa is one of the people we probably know the most about in the Talmud. We have the most stories written about him and his students, and in fact they're quite famous. A lot of those stories we learn in school already. By the way, if at any point you have a question, you can, if you can raise your hand, maybe someone can unmute you. But if you want, you can also put it in the chat. If it's in Dutch, I probably won't be able to understand it. Let me be slightly less humble. I definitely won't be able to understand it. But if it's in English, I'll have a good shot at it. What was I going to say? Yeah. Rabbi Akiwa begins life how? Remember, he starts in the shadow of the destruction of the temple. He's an Am Haaretz. He's totally ignorant of Jewishness, Jewish learning. He probably keeps some mitzvot here and there, but totally ignorant. He used to hate the rabbis. He says about himself in the Gemara that if he'd see rabbis, he'd literally bite them like he was a donkey. And I imagine, I may be wrong, I imagine it's the trauma of the destruction of the temple. Maybe his parents have been killed by Roman soldiers and he blamed the rabbis, or he was angry with the rabbis. Something happens and he's very, very anti the rabbis, basically. And he grows up, and this is a time of desolation of the Jewish people. The temple's been destroyed. Thousands of Jews have been killed. Rome is occupying it. It's an awful time. And he gets himself a job with Kalba Savur, one of the wealthiest people around. And he's a shepherd. And Kalba Savur, it's Kalba Savur's daughter, Rachel, who is the real hero of the story. She sees something in him. And if you hear the story as a kid, maybe she just thought he was really good looking and fell in love with him. But actually, that's not the story. She says, I want to marry you. But she says, I'll do it. And obviously, she's the most eligible woman in town. She says, I'll do it on one condition. Not that you spend the rest of your life with me. That's the romantic end of the sentence. No, I want you to go for years and become a great scholar and then build the great learning. Why did she say that? Because you have to think what's going on. The Jewish world was teetering on the precipice of absolute collapse. There was a bunch of rabbis left in Yavne. That's it. The Nasi himself, Rabbi Gamliel, is in hiding till a bit later on. Let's say he might already made it into Yavne. You literally got a little village of scholars. There's no great leadership. There's nothing. It's under Rome. This could all fall apart very, very quickly and very, very easily. Like British culture pretty much fell apart. The elites usually became Romans, and everybody else kind of followed sooner or later, and that was it till the fall of Rome. So it's over. We need great leadership. And Akiva, you as a shepherd, I've seen something in you. Whether it's his charisma or his hard work, something, she's seen something. You have the potential to be the leader that the Jewish people need. And so I will marry you, because everyone wants to marry me, and I'll do it on condition. Not that you spend your life with me. Maybe the end will come back together. But you go off now for many, many years and become that leader the Jewish people need. And the Talmud reports after 12 years of doing it, he was desperate to come home. And he had succeeded. He'd become a supersized scholar. He'd gone and built learning academies. He'd used his leadership to actually build the learning networks. He already had a network of over 10,000 or 12,000 people. And she basically gets a message to him and says, I don't want you back. You're doing the right thing, but we're not there yet. I want you to keep going. And off he goes again. And he ends up being nearly 25 years, and he produces these 24,000 students. He produced the biggest Jewish learning network for centuries and centuries to come. And this produces a spiritual revival amongst the Jewish people and a sense of confidence amongst the people. And of course, it's very linked to what happens after that, which is the Bar Kokhba revolt. Bar Kokhba rebels against Rome. Rabbi Akiwa supports him, the other rabbis didn't. But Rabbi Akiwa is the one who's rebuilt the Jewish people. He's the greatest leader there is. And off he goes, and this, with this spiritual awakening, and they appear to have miraculous military success. And they crush several Roman legions. And many Roman legions are conquered, and Judea becomes an independent state for 3 whole years, till the Roman army can put in the end almost half its army in and crush it. But for 3 whole years, and they believe Mashiach's here. Rabbi Akiva himself believed this had worked. You can imagine their joy when they came back together, Rachel and Rabbi Akiva. We did it. We gave everything up, right? Her father had cut off the inheritance because she was convinced that Akiva had, like, just this guy Akiva just charmed her, and he was furious. He said, there's no money for you guys. This is not about, she said, I don't care. They lived as paupers. They'd given up everything, but they'd rebuilt the Jewish people, and it had been worth it. They brought Mashiach almost. And they were now in their old age seeing all this happen. And then it all came crashing down. All 24,000 died. The Gemara says they one opinion, they died a horrible death. It's called askara. We're not sure what askara exactly is. Some think it's a respiratory disease. Some think it's there is in the Igeris or Sharira Gon, it sounds like it might actually be that they were killed in a shmad, in a destruction, which maybe is referring to the Bar Kokhba revolt. Whatever it was, somewhere every single one of these students is dead. And the Bar Kokhba revolt is crushed, and a million Jews are dead, and rivers of blood everywhere, and the Judeans have been thrown out of the south, and sooner or later will get kicked out of the north, and Torah is being persecuted everywhere. And you can imagine, if you had just sacrificed everything in your life, from the age of 40 till 65 for all of this, and every single piece of it is totally destroyed, and the Jewish people are now crushed and devastated, you would have to be beyond superhuman to wake up the next morning, I think. Certainly to be able to function like a normal human being, or to be able to ever smile again. I think you'd have to be beyond superhuman. I don't think it's the sort of thing a human could have literally given that much up, and literally taken the Jews from the bottom to the top. And then every student you have or know is dead. And the entire thing you live for is gone. And the Jewish people are dead, and they're blaming you, and the Romans are hunting. It's all over. It's all over. How can you wake up the next morning? And you or I hope we'd have the strength just to continue. I don't know. Please God, we should never know such things. I mean, please God, we should know that the 24,000 students, but we should never know such things happen to anybody anywhere. But Rabbi Akiva does something. Imagine he goes to the south, looking around the country now. Is there anyone left he can teach? And all he can find in the whole country is 5 people. You know that, like, why would you bother? Imagine, you fill this 24,000, it's all gone. Why would you bother with the 5 and then risk your life for it? Well, you imagine the pain you feel of these 5 when you got 24,000. It's like, oh, come on, just give up already. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't give up. He doesn't give up. He invests in these 5. And the incredible thing is, and then he gets caught by the Romans. By the way, he gives them smicha, he makes them all rabbis. Then he gets caught by the Romans, and he gets tortured to death and skinned to death. But after he dies, these 5 students continue, and they rebuild. And these 5 students become so great, and their teaching so great, that they become the basis through which all the texts we have, the versions that particular in the oral Torah, ultimately come through them. Mishnah, Rameh, the Brisa, everything, Medrash, Zohar, it's all their teachings. It's all their teachings. The Talmidim Shabbadorim, the students in the south, pretty much. Rabbi Akiva, everything is ultimately based on Rabbi Akiva. These 5 ended up being the conduit through which the whole of Torah of Judaism ended up staying alive. In other words, something about what Rabbi Akiva did incredibly, that last little push kept Judaism alive when it could have collapsed, and allowed us to be what we are to this very day. So let's hold that for a moment and realize one thing before we go any further. 24,000 students died. That's not what we're celebrating, the end of their death. What we're celebrating is Rabbi Akiva, the day Rabbi Akiva picked himself up and said, they're all dying around me. I'm not giving up. I'm continuing. That's the first part of Lag BaOmer. And that is something incredible. A day worth celebrating. The day when he should have just packed up, and if he could have even had the strength to rise the next morning and be a human alive, that would have been incredible. And if he had the strength to continue as a Jew and gone into retirement with his wife and managed to stay out of depression, that would have been incredible. If he just even gone into depression, anything. And instead he went down to the south of the country, 5 and didn't give up, and invested in them and invested in them and invested in them. and rebuilt. The second aspect is Rav Shimon bar Yochai. One of those 5 students was called Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon, son of Yochai, and Rav Shimon bar Yochai also became, in fact, according to some sources, became the best of all the students, became the elite of the students. And Rav Shimon also ended up being persecuted, hunted by the Romans. He went with his son into a cave. 13 years he has to hide altogether. And Rav Shimon reaches the point where he feels he's going to die. He's kept the last Pesach of his life and he realizes he's not going to live much longer. And what he does, he gathers the students together and he puts them into a big circle. Why does he put them into a big circle? Because the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Akiva's students died because Lanagu covered zelazah. They didn't honor one another well enough. Rabbi Akiva, remember, teaches us loving your neighbor like yourself is the great rule of Torah. Whether that was what he taught afterwards or he taught it before, but they didn't live up to it fully. Maybe they loved each other but didn't honor each other. Maybe there's a difference, but something about it was poison and they were gone. Rav Shimon won't let that mistake happen. And he gathers the students and he sits them in a big circle. A big circle is a shape where everybody sees that I can't see the whole of my Rebbe. I can't hear everything, but I know that together we need to build the whole. When I look in a circle, I see everybody in the circle. And we realize that we need each other if we're going to preserve Torah. And then Reb Shimon starts revealing deep secrets of Torah that nobody could live with. And he's basically saying, if you want this level of Torah, you have to have unity. And he teaches and his face starts glowing. And he continues to teach and his face is glowing. It's like his body is fading and its last hours, but his soul is glowing more and more powerful until people can hardly see a body. All they can see is a light. And at a certain moment, he expires and is gone. And those teachings are with us. But you understand what Rabbi Shimon's saying? My rabbi, Rabbi Akiwa, is not just about everything else he's about the continuation of Torah. No matter how far things go, it can continue. And my last day is about the continuation of Torah. I'm going to reveal things that I don't have the physical energy to reveal anymore, because I want you to make sure I don't leave this world without everything there is. But I want to also teach you how to continue Torah with unity, with love for one another. And that day, according to Arizal, is the same day, years later, that Rabbi Akiwa had gone and found Reb Shimon himself. That same day, many years later, he says, this was the day. This is the day. If I can leave the world, it's got to be this day. The day Rabbi Akiwa found me, the day he believed in me, the day we started the rebuilding together is the day I passed that on to you. And so this becomes a day of having the courage to rebuild when everything looks like it's over. But let's pause here and ask a question. Okay, but what is it that gave Rabbi Akiwa that incredible strength? What is it that allowed him to do the impossible? And I think there's at least 3 answers that emerge from the rabbinic sources, maybe more. The first is what I've already told you. There was somebody who believed in him, and she is the real hero of the story. That's Rachel. And if you don't believe me, Rabbi Akiwa himself says it. Says that when he came back after those 24 years and he arrives in the town and there's this poor woman, bedraggled, who clearly maybe hasn't changed her clothes for years and is in rags and whatever. And she comes to him and goes down to his feet. And the rabbis think, oh my goodness, there's some like homeless person jumping on him. And he says, stop. He says, Shaliva Shalachem, everything I have and everything you have is hers. This was hers, not mine. She's the one who took me as a nobody. She's the one who married me when nobody else would, or certainly nobody dreamed of marrying somebody of that caliber. And she married me on condition that I go and rebuild the Jewish people. I had no dream of rebuilding the Jewish people. I had no dream to be a rabbi. I had no dream to be anything. I was attacking rabbis. I didn't like this stuff. So whilst I was in the anti-rabbinic world, she saw in me the ability to change the whole world. And that belief in Rabbi Akiwa built Rabbi Akiwa. That's the first. The second aspect is another very famous moment, which is often not fully grasped and understood. Presumably Rabbi Akiwa was taken aback by this proposition and probably thought about it a little while and blown away by it. What a strange thing out of the blue, that this should even be on the agenda. And it says that he was taking his sheep one day down by the river and he noticed, again, a famous story, children learn this story, that he saw erosion. He saw drippings, mini waterfall or something that eroded and bored a hole through a rock and dripped to the other side. And he said, I noticed something very interesting. No individual drop of water can possibly make a hole in a rock, even very porous rock like limestone. It can't do it from an individual. In fact, no individual drop can even make a measurable impact that we can see. And yet, the cumulative effect of enormous amounts of drops over enormous amounts of time eventually goes not just one little dent in there, but can rip all the way through. He said, well, if water, which is soft, can do it to rock, which is hard, then what about the possibility of something spiritual and powerful like Torah to something permeable and soft like the human mind, heart, and brain? Surely it is possible for me to start to greatness, which I didn't think I could. Now, people miss the significance of this one. I mean, the basic significance they get correctly. But I'll tell you something very interesting. Rabbi Akiwa is a great leader of the Jewish people, but who is the first great leader of the Jewish people? Moses. There's a lot of parallels between them. Both their lives are 120 years. Both of them, the first 40 years, hadn't done anything, and so on and so forth. Both of them were shepherds. Both of them, Moshe ends up giving us the written Torah. Through Rabbi Akiwa, we end up getting the particular design and structure of the oral Torah, right? So there's a lot of parallels. These are the two great Torah givers in history. And both of them have an inspiring story, or have a lot of stories to do with waters and rocks. And Moshe Rabbeinu, whenever he sees rocks, moves them straight out of the way. Remember, right early on in his life, he's going into Midian, he sees a well, he sees a bunch of shepherds there, he sees Yisro's daughters, the women, have been being mistreated. He just picks up the rock and off it's gone. You got a problem with water with Moshe, just pop the rock and the water comes out. Later in life, that gets him in trouble because God says, speak to the rock. He just pops it, hits it with a stick, and off it goes, and the water's there. So, of course, symbolically, this relationship between rocks and water is not an idle metaphor. It appears again and again and again. It appears in Rabbi Akiwa, it appears in Moshe Rabbeinu, it appears with Yaakov. It appears very often because the Torah itself uses water as a metaphor for itself, for Torah. Right? When Moshe Rabbeinu speaks at the end of his life, he said, my word should flow like water. Yarav kamata likhi, teza katalim rasi. It should be like dew and like rain, my words. And again, this is a metaphor. Rabbis always say, Ein mayim ela Torah. You don't talk about water unless you really mean Torah. And the rock is that which blocks Torah from entering the world. You see, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he encounters the rock, he just moves it. Rabbi Akiwa, when he encounters the rock, he can't just move it. And now let me turn to another story that the Talmud tells. It tells that Moshe Rabbeinu was going up to heaven to receive Torah, and he sees the scroll of Torah being written in heaven. And he sees the text, the crowns being written on top of letters. And he says, God, why are you bothering all these crowns on letters? And God responds to Moshe and says, Moses, Moshe, there's going to come a man in the future who will be able to learn piles of Jewish law out of every one of these little crowns. Moshe says, really? Who's this man? Who's this person? He says, shows him, here's Akiva ben Yosef, here's the future Rabbi Akiwa. You know what? Moshe says, show me his class. He sits in his classroom and he hears Rabbi Akiwa talking and he cannot understand a word that he's saying. He sits, in fact, in the 8th row of the class. Now, in those days, the great teachers had 7 rows of students. If they got a court ruling that to rule on, the students would argue it out in front of the Rebbe, and the greatest student sat in the front row. The next wave sat in the 2nd row, 3rd row, 4th row. So you'd start in the 7th row, and through your life, you get promoted until you'd be in the front row, and eventually you'd perhaps be able to also be a rabbi yourself and give the talk. Moshe's in the back of the back. He can't understand a word that Rabbi Akiwa is saying. And he's despondent. He says to God, you got a guy as great as this who I can't understand, and you give Torah through me? And so the dialogue goes on. And then at the end of the talk, they say, Rabbi Akiwa, where does all this come from? He says, it's all halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is all part of what Moshe was taught at Sinai, and Moshe's excited again. You think, what does that Gemara mean? What's going on? What's the Gemara trying to say? That Rabbi Akiwa is greater than Moshe? That's not what the Gemara usually holds. But what does it mean? And I heard once, I think this is the correct interpretation, is you see, when Moshe meets a rock, Moshe removes the rock. Moshe always sees the Torah. There's no real obstacle between him and Torah. It's a bit like, I tell you, it's a bit like, if you walk into a room and the light is on, you can instantly tell me what's in front of you in the room. Oh, there's a bookshelf there. Oh, there's a chair over there. There's a lampshade there. There's a plug over there. There's tables and chairs, all this kind of stuff. If we walk in the room and we're blind or the light is off, then it's going to take us a lot longer to analyze the room to be able to work out what this is. This might be a bed. Oh no, it doesn't have a mattress. Oh, it's probably a chair. Oh no, it doesn't have a back of a chair. Oh, it's a table. Oh, okay, fine. No, it's not. It's a shelf. Oh, okay, it's got books on it. It's a bookshelf. I got it. Okay, and now this. Oh, this might be a wall. No, it's not a wall. It's got an edge. Oh, it might be a mirror. No, it's not. Oh, it's a computer, right? And so we'd eventually work it out by analyzing the details and the details and the details. If the light's on, you don't analyze the details. You might not even notice all the details, the grooves, the cuts, the slight change of texture. It's not relevant to you. You can see exactly what's there. Moshe is like the person with the light on. If there's a block, he just switches on the light. He can see Torah 100%. Rabbi Akiva can't. Rabbi Akiva lives in a world that's dark. We can't spiritually intuit Torah in the way that Moshe could. Now we got to feel it around. And that's how Rabbi Akiva's students teach and learn Torah. What about this? How do you read this verse? Well, that word maybe means this. But if it means this, then if it means forbidden, then why in the other verse that say that? Well, no, but that, yes, okay, let's try a new approach. And eventually, analytically, you can finally reconstruct piece by piece that whole picture. If the person sees the room with the light on, here's the blind people talking, here's a groove, here's a this, well, I don't know what they're talking about in this room. I don't see grooves and texture changes. But then they say at the end, this is the room that so-and-so described. Oh, great. In other words, Moshe's greatness meant that he saw Torah in one go. He removed the rock and the river just flowed. Rabbi Akiva's greatness is that when you couldn't move the rock and the rock's going to stand there forever blocking you, he worked out how detail by detail and drip by drip, you could eventually reconstruct the whole picture. And that became a metaphor, not just for the methods of teaching Torah, but for the method of leading the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu could lead them if the people were ready to look at the light of God directly. And when the people had to live in the darkness, Moshe's too great to go down and find them. I mean, obviously he can find them on some level. He goes down for a long time, but eventually the gulf is so big. Moshe can't lead you he can't teach the blind person how to see. He sees. But Rabbi Akiva becomes the teacher for the real darkness. We have many in between who are great teachers too. But when you reach the real darkness of exile, when there's no more prophecy and there's nothing, how do you find Torah in that? How do you teach Torah in that? The answer is always going to be painful, tiny step by painful, tiny step. But what Rabbi Akiva learns is no drop of water is actually lost. No drop is too small to make an impact because no drop's greater than the others really. And if cumulative amount of drops can do this, then starting the drops today will mean that eventually a hole will be made. And so Rabbi Akiva can look at he's created a hole in the rock, and in one fell swoop, Rome comes and puts another rock down. And Rabbi Akiva's attitude is, okay, let me start again. I don't know what these 5 are going to do, but let me start dripping drops. Who knows what will come as a result? So that's the second power that Rabbi Akiva had. One was the woman who believed in his greatness and his potential when it wasn't even an ambition for him. It wasn't even on his radar. But when somebody else believes in him, he can suddenly think about maybe I can be something I never dreamed of being or never believed I could be. Factor number 2 was he was inspired by the notion that if you can't get something at once, every drop will matter and accumulate. That's how he taught Torah. That's how he taught us to learn Torah. That's the Torah you need when you don't have the spiritual light of the prophets and Moshe and so on. That's the spiritual light, the journey that we need. Drip, drop, drip, drop. But it was also the thing that told him that 5 little drops, 5 little students when 24,000 have died, is worth every single drop that you put into them. And that was his second point of inspiration. The third is this. The Rabbi Akiva has an uncanny ability, an uncanny nature. You know, when he was being slaughtered and tortured, and his skin was about to be flayed in the markets of Rome, and his students see this great Rabbi Akiva, who just a few years earlier had been the spiritual force behind the revolt, had built the biggest Torah network and all this kind of stuff, and is now reduced to being skinned to death. And they're crying and crying, and they see Rabbi Akiva laughing. And they ask him why. He says, do you know, all my life I said the words, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, listen Israel, God is one. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, you should love Hashem your God, b'chol levavecha, with all your heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, b'chol moedecha, with all your might. And you know, I never knew when I'd be able to keep those verses. Of course I loved God and I gave everything to him, but all your soul, all your life, give your life for God. I gave a lot for God. Right now, I have an opportunity to give my life for God. And I rejoice at the incredible ability to fulfill the verse I would say my whole life. Now, again, maybe, truth is in history, martyrs have been able to do those sorts of things, but probably because they've been inspired by Rabbi Akiwa. But that pattern of Rabbi Akiwa is a part of a pattern. It wasn't a one-off moment of inspiration at the end of his life. Again and again in Talmud and Medrash, the following scenario happens. Let me give you the schematic structure. Rabbi Akiva is sitting with the other rabbis. It might be his Rabbi Eliezer's deathbed, or Rav Yochanan actually, Ibn Zakkai. It might be another time when, whatever, different scenarios. Everybody is crying. Everyone's crying. And then the Talmud of the Medrash will tell us, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. And always the same dialogue takes place. Akiva, why are you laughing? And he says to them, why are you crying? And they explain, this great rabbi is on his deathbed, somebody this great's dying. And he's suffering as he dies. And Rabbi Akiva will turn around and say, that's why I'm laughing. This great rabbi is suffering as he dies. There's no human being who's ever achieved 100% perfection, never done a sin. So I worried he'd leave this world and have to pay for his sins in the next life before he gets to the world to come. Now I see he's suffering in this world, that kind of stuff. He sees something when everybody else sees despair, he sees hope. One of the classical stories is not long after, he's walking again. We're talking, all this is in the decades after the destruction of the temple. He and the rabbis are walking in the hills and mountains around Jerusalem, and they see the site of the Temple Mount, and they see foxes running over what used to be the house of God. And everyone's crying. And Rabbi Akiva's laughing. Rabbi Akiva's laughing. Why are you laughing? Why are you crying? Because look at this is the terrible prophecy of Jeremiah. The foxes will be running across it. Rabbi Akiva says, that's why I'm laughing. Because just like that prophecy came literally and catastrophically true, more than we could imagine, so too the other prophecies there will come literally true, more than we can possibly imagine. In other words, when everybody feels the deep, dark, bleak pain of the moment, Rabbi Akiva's eyes are always far into the future and see this is not a death and destruction. It's a birth pang. It's the beginning of a process of something that will lead to, yes, it's destroying all that has existed till now, but in its place will come something even greater. As long as we can invest, our job is to know that and to make the right investment now. We don't know what's going to come to fruition. We don't know what meaning our actions have. We don't know what good our actions do. So if we have our own plans and our own ideas and our own ideals and our own sense of this is what it's going to achieve, then you know what? That may well not come to fruition. But if we know that everything is a drop and the end of the journey of those drops is going to be the most incredible redemption, then however long it takes, we can always celebrate the good that will be at the end of it. That was what gave Rabbi Akiwa his particular power. Let me pause if there's any questions. I have some more things I want to say, but let me pause if there's any questions on this. Anyone wants to write something in the comments or raise a hand and perhaps unmute and ask something. I think 3 or 4 people are muted over there. Could people who are not asking mute themselves, please? I think you've all been unmuted right now. To ask a question, feel free to put yourself on screen and raise your hand or wave, or just make some comments in the comment thing there. For now, I'm just going to assume that there aren't questions. So let's just sum up where we are, and then I want to go further. Where we are is we asked the question, how Lag BaOmer, 33rd day of the Omer, can be a celebration if it's supposed to be the end of the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, but they all died. What's the great celebration? And what we've begun to understand is, no, that's not the point. The point is that when everything looked like it was over, 33rd day of the Omer is the day Rabbi Akiva decided to pick himself up, having buried his last student. Or some rabbis, the Bri Chodesh, for example, says he was actually still in the middle. The students didn't all finish dying then, but it's the day he went to the south. Others say the day he gave them the smicha. But either way, it was the day that represents that courageous moment where Rabbi Akiva says, in the midst of death and destruction, with everything all around me, maybe he's buried his last student. He's in his old age. I don't give up. There's no hope. Yes, there is. It's all hopeless and disaster. Everything you built, die. I don't care. I'm going to go anyway. And just like Rachel believed in me, and just like every drop of water makes a difference, I know that in the end it will all be worth it. And therefore, I won't look at 5 students as just 5. I don't see 5 students sitting in front of me. I see them as the teachers who will teach another 5 each and another 5 each and another 5 each. I see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews learning Torah through the ages because of these 5. I see millions of Jews, including Reuben and Michael and Ephraim and Doron and Eldan and Avraham and Meir and all of you. We're all doing this because we're continuing what Rabbi Akiwa did over there. Daniel himself, all of us. That's what Rabbi Akiwa saw. I don't see 5. I see millions. I see these as the first little drops that will accumulate and tear through that rock. That power, that courage, that ability is Lag BaOmer, the first part of Lag BaOmer. I'll give you one other angle of this before we turn to its ultimate, to its greatest in Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. But you see, this is a deep Jewish concept because you see it in the Talmud says that right now God is writing a book of Tanakh, a biblical book. I'm going to reiterate a point. I believe I shared it with those of you who were on the weekend last year. Last year on the weekend together. It was one of those beautiful weekends just outside Amsterdam. I forget the name of the place. I apologize. And so those of you there might remember me saying this. But beautiful thing, the Talmud tells us that right now God is writing a book of the Tanakh, another Bible. And what's going to be in it will be very similar to what was in the last one. And then the Gemara points out how many episodes of Torah are things you or I would have thought were quite insignificant. Obviously, giving the Torah, hugely significant. Building the temple, amazing. But how about this? The Gemara says, if Aaron the priest had known that the moment he comes to see Moshe's just met God at the bush. And Moshe goes and is marching back to Egypt and he's nervous. He's about to be appointed the leader of the people. Is his brother going to be jealous? And it says, V'ra v'samach b'libo. God says, you know what? Aaron's going to come and he's going to rejoice. The Torah says that had Aaron known that his meeting Moshe and his rejoicing is going to be written, he wouldn't just rejoice. He'd have brought a band along with him. If he'd have known that moment is so significant that it'll be written into history forever, he'd have brought a band. And the Gemara carries on other examples. It brings Ruth, right? Boaz, and we're coming to the Shavuot story very soon. We're going to read Megillat Ruth, right? Ruth, the book of Ruth, the convert, and we're going to read about how Boaz, the great leader of the Jewish people, sees this Moabite convert girl in the field who's feeling a bit insecure about herself, and how he looks after her, and then eventually gives her a bunch of grains. And the Talmud said, had he known that it was going to write about him, that he's giving her a bunch of grains, he wouldn't have given her grains, he'd have given her gold. So you sit thinking, what was the meaning of this Talmud? And the meaning I think is very clear, and I remember learning this in yeshiva, it was very powerful. That you see, what it's telling you is this. Imagine you were Boaz, or you were a biographer of Boaz. Who is Boaz? He's a judge. He's a prophet. He's a political leader. He's a military leader. In those days, you could have them all in one. If you were writing a book about him, a biography of him, you would probably write a multi-volume biography. 1 volume on his military conquests, 1 volume on his political life, 1 volume on his spiritual life, his first prophecies, his Torah teaching, everything. Do you know what you probably would never have thought to even include in a biography? Is that once he was walking past the poor convert girl and gave her a bunch of grains. Wouldn't even notice if it happened. In the whole of Tanakh, we do not know a single war that Boaz fought. It's not written. We know he's a prophet, but we're not recorded. Not 1 single prophecy of his is recorded. Not 1 single judgment of his, except right at the end of the book of Ruth. Not 1 single law, not 1 single nothing. Not his political life, nothing. Virtually the only thing we know about his entire multi-volume biography worth of life is that he gave this girl a bunch of grains. You know what it's telling you? As much as the great political campaigns and spiritual moves and everything can bring Mashiach and bring the world to perfection, as much of that at least can be the act of giving a bunch of grains to the convert girl. And indeed, that's exactly what happens. She goes home that night, tells her mother-in-law, the mother-in-law recognizes who this guy is. Eventually it leads to marriage. Boaz and Ruth marry, and out of that seed comes King David and comes Mashiach. And that's where it goes. And the deep belief in Judaism that every single thing is part of the revelation of the oneness of God means that every single moment matters infinitely and eternally. As the Mishnah puts in Pirkei Avot, there's no person who doesn't have their moment. There isn't an object in the world that doesn't have its place. Everything. You think a person's insignificant, you think you're insignificant, and we think I'm insignificant. I think, what difference do my actions make? Does it matter if I pray with more kavanah or not? Anyway, we can't do a minyan right now under Corona. And really, my prayer's the one that goes to heaven. There's sort of great rabbis out there, prayers go to heaven. Mine. Does it matter if I learn a few minutes now, listen to the Sjioer, or maybe just get a bit distracted for a few minutes, do a Gemara, do that? Should I do Gemara or not? Does it really matter? Does it matter if I give charity? I'm not a big philanthropist. Do my £20 really make a difference, or whatever, euro, 20 euros? I think today £20 not much more than 20 euros, but whatever. Do these things make any difference in the world? The big billionaires matter in charity. And what the Torah is telling you, what Rabbi Akiwa is telling you, is no, every single drop really, really, really changes the whole thing. If you believe like Rabbi Akiwa that history is going to have that perfect end, then you realize what makes it perfect is it's built out of every single thread that is invested into it. The hole in the rock is created out of every drop. Then you never give up. Then you never worry about if your plan just completely collapsed and failed. You may have built your entire life. I tell you, I was talking to somebody now. I'll digress to talk for a moment about today, because look, there's a lot of people we know are having a tough time business-wise, charity-wise, job-wise. So I was speaking to somebody who'd been a supporter of ours, who in all looking naturally is probably going to be seeing very serious financial ruin and collapse. And the person tells me, they built their whole life with one ambition. They're not going to be a great Torah scholar, not this, not that, but they can at least be a great philanthropist. And you know what it's going to be like to lose all of that? Now, please God, they won't. Maybe they won't. Maybe Hashem will help them. But let's suppose they do. So what do we think? So you know what Rabbi Akiwa would say? You did beautiful things as a philanthropist. You were amazing. You fulfilled your purpose. God's got another plan now. When you play a virtual reality game and you finish level 1. So level 1, you built your first part of your life was your first 50, 60 years as a philanthropist, and you did amazing things. Now God says, I've got a new plan. I'm going to put scenario 2. I'm going to put you into different, I know you want to carry on this scenario, but I've actually got a different mission. Here, change screen. You're now you're now playing the poor person. Now how do you serve God as that? It's a different mission. Maybe your charity is going to be much smaller, but you still have a life of experience and a wellspring from which you can draw and give. It's just going to be a different type of giving from which you can grow. Perhaps keeping your faith with all of this is going to change the world. What Rabbi Akiwa would tell you, I tried to build 24,000 students to bring Mashiach, and I was left with 5. Did they make a difference? Yeah. In fact, your 24,000 will also bring Mashiach. Somehow they will. Somehow their teachings are preserved back in Rabbi Akiwa, who was able to give their energy back into those 5 students. He didn't just come as Rabbi Akiwa. He came as Rabbi Akiwa plus his 24,000 students and invested all of that into those 5. This was a new scenario, a new game. But I know that every moment is not lost. So my 24,000 students are not lost, and the remainder of my life is not lost. And I've just got to keep dripping the drips, dripping the water. And indeed, Rabbi Akiwa, we don't have to look back at him and say, eventually got there. Not long after he died, we could already say, wow, those drips of water produced the future of the Jewish people. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes along and says, yes, we're going to keep the 24,000 alive and we're going to learn from them. They lost it because of lack of honoring each other. We'll keep all their greatness and we'll take one step further. We'll preserve their memory by going further than they could go. From now onwards, we're going to teach Torah always groups together. Always bechavut, always learning together, always trying our best to respect one another. And it's a struggle. It will be a struggle through all of history. It's so easy not to respect others. But we've got to keep fighting that struggle drip by drip. And you may feel, I've worked so hard to invest, but these guys in the community are tearing the community apart. What good does my little bit do? And you may feel, we're working in Holland really well as a cohesive community, but elsewhere in the world, they're tearing each other. Or maybe in Holland, they're tearing each other. I don't know what's going on. And what Shimon Bar Yochai says is the small group that gathers around him is enough to bring the whole secrets of Torah out into the world. The deepest depths that have been taught before, they can all come out now. If you can bring a bit of unity into the world, not even a lot, then you merit to keep the depths of Torah alive in the world. And Rabbi Akiwa teaches us the courage to go on no matter what. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai takes that courage to the next generation and says those little drops, even small amounts of the unity and effort you put in, can already start to produce deep, deep, deep dimensions and incredible results. And together, they show us the following, that no matter how dark the world gets, and no matter how broken and painful it is, that if we can believe in our own ability to bring goodness to the world, And believe that in darkest moments, there's a laughter on the other side. And believe that each drop that we have is worth the entirety of creation and existence. Then we have the ability to survive the darkest moments ever and to keep building things even greater and even greater. And that light came into the world on Lag BaOmer twice. Once by Rabbi Akiwa in finding Reb Shimon and the other four rabbis, and once by Reb Shimon in passing the torch on again. And that's the minhag of the Kabbalists and today, widespread minhag of everybody lighting the bonfires, because the flame that grows in the bonfire starts from usually a tiny little match, a tiny little drop, and it brings the light to the world. And that flame that lights the bonfire is the flame within all of us, the flame that Rabbi Akiwa saw, exactly the opening analogy he gave. He said, if water which is soft can drop by drop penetrate the rock which is so hard, then Torah that is all fire can penetrate my heart, my mind, me. And the flame of Rabbi Akiwa, that he was killed in a flame, in a fire, or partially, and then skinned. Many other rabbis were literally burnt to death. But the fire he lit passed through Reb Shimon bar Yochai and all those students. It became the Mishnah, it became the Gemara, it became the Medrash, it became the Zohar, it became everything. It became you, it became me. We're carrying on teaching the teachings of Rabbi Akiwa. And we're carrying on teaching the learning of the Talmud, practicing those things, practicing the Torah of Moshe, that gushing water, through the teachings of Rabbi Akiwa and the oral Torah and the preservation of the Jew. And that is worth a celebration. So that should be something we think about and understand as we get to Lag BaOmer. The final point I'll make on it is this. You know, that we say that Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva's teachers. And he said straight after the destruction of the temple, he said to his 5 students, tell me what's the good pathway to go down. And each one gives a different answer. And one of them says, Lev Tov, a good heart. He says, I see that's the right one because it includes all the others. We've got to work on a Lev Tov. If you want to develop Torah, you want to take out from coming out of Egypt all the way till bringing Torah into the world on Shavuot, you've got to work on developing a good heart. That's what Rabbi Akiwa taught us, love your neighbor like yourself. It's what his students, unfortunately, on some level, not internalized. What Reb Shimon bar Yochai taught us again, develop that good heart, that love for everybody. The good heart also includes the recognition that each one of you is worth all of creation. The belief in everybody, like Rachel believed in Rabbi Akiwa, like Rabbi Akiwa believed in everybody, that's the Lev Tov, the belief in the significance of every moment. Lev, in Hebrew, is Gematria 32. That's the first 32 days of the Omer, they say. You're working on your heart. Through all the pain, through everything, you're working on developing that heart. Then comes those last 17 days. 17 is Gematria, Tov, good. That's now you're focused. You've got Rabbi Akiva's hope. You've got that value of every person. Now we drive forward and now we receive Torah. So Hashem shall help all of us to find the courage of Rabbi Akiwa within us, that incredible hope that powers the Jew and the incredible belief and unshakable faith in God who has unshakable faith in each of us. That every single moment of our lives, the lives of our children, our families, our communities, our friends, our not friends, is worth the whole of creation. And that if we can put a drop into every single moment, then we can light flames that will last and have infinite significance to all of history and live to see that light glow on into the next generation, eventually to the full light of Oreth Chodesh Al Tzion Torah, the great light that will come to shine in the world from Jerusalem once again when God's presence returns in full to the world. May we all be a part of that journey. And with that, I finish my words. And again, if there's any questions, I'm happy to open for questions.
I will open everybody. I will unmute everybody, see how it goes.
Okay. So people who are not going to ask questions should probably mute themselves anyway, because otherwise we have lots of background.
Just compliments.
Brian, are you asking?
No questions, just compliments on your story.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your inspiring words.
A pleasure, a pleasure. Great. If there's no questions, I'm happy to leave it there. It's really, really been a pleasure speaking to you all. If anybody does want to ask me a question, didn't want to in this forum, feel free to contact Eldan and he can forward the question to me, or if it needs a phone conversation, I think, and then he'll ask me, but I'll probably say yes and give the number, and you can try and get through to me. So so with pleasure, I'm happy to be in touch. I know last time after the weekend we had quite a lot of dialogue with many of you, and it's really, you know, it's a community I fell in love with. So so feel free to be in touch. But either way, I hope you should all have a wonderful Lag BaOmer and succeed in a difficult time in bringing light to yourselves and others as well. And we should all merit all the good things.
Go ahead. Thank you very much for this inspiring shir tonight. For everybody on the Zoom, tomorrow we have Nachshon Rodriguez Pereira, and Friday we have an early Kabbalah Shabbat Zoom at 4 o'clock with the former Chief Rabbi of Israel, Rav Rowe. And the program for next week you will see in the newsletter. Everybody stay healthy, and I hope to see you tomorrow. And Rav Rowe, thank you very much again, and hope to see you another time on the Zoom.
Please God. Thank you. I'm going now.